So today it will concern applied industrial toxicology, and the webinar will be given by Anna Steneholm, and the slides are already on your screen. So Hannah has a PhD at the Karolinska Institute on innate immune airway response after exposure to ultrafine ambient particles in vivo and in vitro models. And then she integrated the industry at the Castrol and Nordic lubricants in 2000. And then she moved to NINAS in 2006. And then she was a group specialist toxicology at NINAS in 2019. And now she's a senior toxicology consultant at TKT Sweden, where she specialized in chemical, pharmaceutical, and food regulatory toxicology and product stewardship. And she's an expert in chemical regulatory development of REACH and CLPs. And she has several articles in regulatory toxicology, pharmacology, for example, and that's why she's a specialist in industrial toxicology. And she also an European registered toxicologist. So I really wanted to thank Hannah for participation, and also Eden finally for the magnificent support and organization. I will just recall that these webinars are on a monthly basis, and the next one will be November 28th, and will be given by Shirley Price, and we'll receive a message as usual. And it will be given by Shirley Price on reprotoxicity. So if you have questions during the webinar, please put it in the chat. We have 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for taking care of the question. Please shut down your microphone during the webinar and use your microphone then if you want to ask a question, but you have to wait for me to give you the floor. I will go first in the question in the chat, and then you can use a microphone if you want to ask a question directly. And last thing, the presentation will be recorded. Okay, thank you very much. Hannah, you can start whenever you want.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the very nice introduction. I am Anna Steneholm, as you heard, and this will be my outline for this presentation. A bit about industrial toxicologists, where we work, what networks we do, and what interactions we have. Regulatory compliance is a big piece, of course, with being an industrial toxicologist, and a bit about the current regulations and also coming. Product stewardship is more on a voluntary basis, but showing you an example of where and how you can think about to put new products onto the market, and different voluntary initiatives available in Europe. And by the end of the presentation, I will give you some examples of scientific advocacy in these fields. So why do you need an industrial toxicologist? Because it is crucial in the development of products to have an effective way of producing these substances and products in a safe way that protects workers and the environment, and also the end consumer, and especially for its intended use. And here we have both the law, the legal requirements, and voluntary initiatives to assess that to assure that the process works all the way down to the end consumer. You can find industrial toxicologists in many different sectors. Within the pharmaceutical industry, where you have the drug development, there is a need within the preclinical phase where toxicological studies are required. On top, there is manufacturing of already approved active ingredients, for instance, and there is biocides within the agricultural industry. You have the food and the feed industry, cosmetics and skincare products. The chemical industry, where I have my heritage, so to say, producing raw materials, chemicals, but also in the mining and metals industry. I worked a lot in the hydrocarbon refining industry. but you also have nano production, nanomaterial production, and polymers. On top, there is a lot of downstream applications, and they means in the production of articles and goods, where you have food contact materials, household products, construction, industry for buildings and housing, clothes, furniture, electronics, and so forth. And I will start with the pharmaceutical industry, just a brief slide on what you do here. So these substances within the pharma, they are developed to have a biological effect, which is generally very different to in the chemical industry. They are not used, they are not produced to have a biological effect. So you expect to see some type of toxicity. And in the development of new drugs, before you go into clinical trials and before you expose humans for the first time in volunteers, you will need to have a standard package available to assess acute toxicity, chronic toxicity in 2 species, a few in vitro assays. And on top, you need to look at the critical organs to ensure that nothing will adversely affect the CNS, heart and lung, and possibly also GI and kidneys. So this is a package of tox studies required, and here, as an industrial toxicologist, you can of course help and put forward a strategic way of having tox studies that are really applicable for the end product, depending on route of exposure and duration of drug, etc. Once the substance is approved, you need to manufacture it in your plant, and here risk assessments are required. You need to assure that you have safety for the workers. They are going to produce this active ingredient on a perhaps daily basis, and you need to derive occupational exposure limits. Also for the drug itself, it's seldom 100%. You have often impurities which you need to identify, and you need to derive permissible daily exposure limits for those to ensure a safe drug in the end of the day. To do this in a general setting, you need a lot of cooperation and a big network. And I'm thinking now a bit more from a chemicals perspective, but you are involved in many parts in the company, but also you have a lot of external contacts. In the product development itself, you need to talk, of course, research and development and the manufacturing of your manufacturing plants of your company, assuring that the substances in use are safe, and perhaps you need to change it to a safer alternative. Authorities, as I already said, they do require different types of toxicity testing. Perhaps there's something lacking in your dossier. You will need to have to talk to a CRO to find a lab that can actually help you do the actual testing. There are very few industries in general that has lab facilities these days. They do exist, but it's not very common. So you use external laboratories, or you go and you talk to different university groups where they have experience in doing different type of research, which is useful to understand modes of action, for instance, of your substance of concern. Of course, everything that we do is also impacted by the society and the different drivers that comes from society. But as an industrial toxicologist, you seldom work alone. You work often through your trade organizations, where you can find help from your peers, which might have similar types of issues that will have to be resolved. And of course, there is ongoing discussions always with customers and the customer needs, and assuring that the products that you put on the market are safe, and that the customers also understand how to use them in a safe way. Then I will move on to the regulatory setting, about regulatory compliance, which is a crucial part, of course, within all industries, but especially for the chemical industry. And here we have different sets of legislations. I'll go through a few of them very briefly. It's a lot of legislation. On a global basis, we have a globalized, harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. This is a voluntary scheme that countries can join, so that they have a framework to work for when putting a label onto their products in that country. In the EU, we have REACH. I'll go more into REACH, but we have CLP instead of DHS. It's a modification of DHS. And we also have a lot of other regulations regulating carcinogenic, mutagenic, reproductive substances and very hazardous substances like POPs and so forth. On a national level, I've just included Sweden since I'm based in Sweden, but of course you have the member state competent authorities. The Swedish one is KEMI, but in Germany you have BFR, in France it's ANSES and so forth, and they are also responsible for the different parts of regulations, and also assisting ECHA in that work. And as I said, there are several countries in the world already signing up for the global harmonized system. And those are the pictograms that was put forward when this legislation was generated. It's a bit more than 10 years ago now. And these are the different pictograms for acutely toxic, for instance, with the skull and crossbones, and the exploding man, we call it, for different types of long-term chronic hazards, whereas the exclamation mark is more for skin and eye irritation and harmful substances. So this is the risk communication. That is very important piece of the puzzle in order to show how your substances, what the hazards are of your substances. In the EU, as I said, we have CLP. It's called the Classification and Labeling of Packaging and Regulation. It's based on the globally harmonized system, but it's not identical, because EU used to have a system in place already when DHS was introduced, and EU didn't want to let go of some old regulations that was added. But the biggest piece of the puzzle is REACH, really. It was launched in 2007, and it's about registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. Just as a recap, who is actually involved, we have 44 countries in Europe, 27 are parts of EU, and REACH is applicable to all EU countries. And also some voluntary member states that also signed up for REACH. So REACH stands for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization, Restriction of Chemicals, launched in 2007, and it really was developed to strengthen the protection of human health and the environment. And it's also mentioned that it should promote alternative methods of hazard assessment to reduce animal testing. And I would say, in principle, REACH really applies to all chemical substances, not only industrial chemicals, but those also found in our everyday life. paints and cleaning products and so forth, but also goods and articles, clothing, furniture, electrical appliances. So the regulation really applies to a vast majority of companies within the EU. And what was different with REACH was that it now places the burden of proof on companies. The companies need to identify and manage the risks associated with the substances when they put them onto the market in the EU. And they must demonstrate how the substances can be used in a safe way, and also inform and have risk management measures suggested, but also communicate through safety data sheets and exposure scenarios if applicable. And if the authorities see that the risk actually cannot be fully managed, they will possibly suggest to restrict the use. And on top, if they see that there are substances of very hazardous nature, they might be listed as substances of very high concern, and these will be put onto a candidate list and will have to be replaced by less hazardous substances. And one key phrase that was launched when REACH was launched was no data, no market, and means if you don't have toxicity data on your substance, you will not be able to sell it. So then what are the actual data requirements then? Well, I already mentioned, depending on the intended use, pharmaceuticals had a small list of a base set data required before you put it first time in human. Cosmetics is more focusing on skin and eye irritation. Here, in vitro is only allowed, but you have to bear in mind that cosmetics are seldom only used in cosmetics. Very often they're also used in chemical applications. And for chemicals, there's the requirements depend on the volume, also to some extent the hazardness of the substance. But so the more product you put on the market on a yearly basis, the higher the requirements for testing. So if you put a substance onto more than 1,000 tons per year, you will have to have 2 species of prenatal developmental toxicity studies, and also probably extending 1 generation reproductive toxicity study, which involves thousands of animals, and they are also lengthy in terms of creating or generating this data, of course. When you work within the chemical industry, REACH actually tells you that you need to work jointly together with your competitors, because you will need to find all the data for your substance together and jointly submit that in a dossier. And if you see that you actually haven't fulfilled that, you have a data gap of toxicity studies, you will have to submit a testing proposal if the testing is supposed to be done on a vertebrate animal. And this testing proposal will be picked up by ECHA, because the next step in the process is the evaluation. And there are 2 different types of evaluations. You have the dossier evaluation, which ECHA does. It really looks at the completeness of the technically of the dossier itself. They can also have special themes of different projects, like we only interested in substances with allergy or so. But one of the key points here is to look into the testing proposal. So as an industry toxicologist, you put forward a proposal for how and what animals and how you think this substance should be tested. It is now for ECHA to put together a draft decision to which the industry can respond to, and in the end of the day, there is a final decision put into place by ECHA. It tells you exactly how you should do the study, what deadline you have, and this deadline is specifically important because if you're not able to generate the data by that deadline, you risk actually to have no data on the market, and that your your substance could be banned on the EU market. Then you also have substance evaluation, and this can be done both by ECHA and member state. And these are substances that someone decides it pose a risk to health and environment, and these are then listed onto a CORAP for further evaluation. Then I will show you the different two pieces of authorization and restriction. Authorization should ensure that substances of very high concern are progressively replaced by something that is less hazardous. And the SVHCs are generally CMRs, category 1B and A, and persistent, bicumulative, and toxic, or very persistent or very cumulative. But they're also opening in the clause by having a case-by-case basis, something that can cause an equivalent level of concern as well. And those substances can be authorized and in the end of the day or eventually possibly banned. There are also restrictions. This is also a limit and ban for placing on the market or manufacturing a substance. It's only not a substance, but it's also a mixture or how it's used in an article. And even so, there could be restrictions for substances that do not require registration. And I will give you an example later on polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which of course no one really produces these substances. Those are byproducts, you can say, from barbecuing or exhausts from cars, so forth. So that was the regulatory, very short overview of very big frameworks available in Europe. These are both slightly new. I mean, they've been around for the last 10, 15 years now. But before that, there was also regulations in place, but more so product stewardship has been an issue, something that the industry has taken on since long. And product stewardship, according to the Product Stewardship Society, is the act of minimizing the health and safety, environmental and social impacts of a product and its packaging throughout the life cycle stages, while also maximizing economic benefits. And as I said, this is a voluntary act. It's up for each and every company to decide what level of product stewardship you would like to have. But one part of the puzzle, which is often used, I would say in one way or another, might not be always so formalized, is to look into the substitution principle. Sweden has been actually formalizing this since a long time, but now this is also introduced to some extent at the EU level. And it's all about finding identification hazard, hazard identification, and then assessing the hazard, looking for what type of alternatives might there be, can you use them, which ones is the best, and in the end of the day, create a product that is better than the original one. You don't have to have one-to-one replacements of substances. Of course, you can also change technologies and other ways of improving the health and the safety of your product in the end of the day. What you need to think of is, though, not to have regrettable substitution, which is you might think that you have a hazardous substance, you look for something that's less hazardous and you find something, but what you'd rather have is a substance without hazard data. And actually it could even be more hazardous, or it could be less, but you actually don't know. It doesn't give you the data. So that's something important to always look into. Don't do regrettable substitution. And now I will give you an example where I've been involved in a case where we went a bit further, actually. Instead of just looking at the hazard, we looked into the risk and also looking into the risk assessment of a new product. So as I said, this is beyond the legislation, but in the end of the day, you want to show that you have a new product that you want to launch to the market. How can you prove that this is safe from a health perspective? And compared to the old product, is this new version better or at least not worse? Of course, you start with looking at the hazard. All the tox data show that it seemed to be okay. The new raw material didn't cause any concern. The actual exposure, you know that for this product type, it will be heated and it will create some hydrocarbon fumes. These can be inhaled and cause respiratory irritation. So the next step will be then, so how will the risk be? And this we did by actually performing occupational exposure measurements of the hydrocarbons during a trial of this substance in use when it was heated. And we looked at more than 70 different hydrocarbons in the fume, and detected the concentrations of them and compared the set occupational exposure limits. So you compare the law and the reality and see, is this new product generating more fume than the previous? And also, are they well below a set occupational exposure limits? And this is a work that I was presenting on a poster last year on EUROTOX, actually. So this is a way to go a bit beyond what you actually are legally required to do, but you want to assure that the products that you put on the market are safe for the user and for the worker being exposed to these substances. There are, of course, more voluntary systems. I think you all are familiar with some of these labels that you can see on goods, generally, green types of green labels. These have requirements behind them on terms of hazardousness. There could also be company industry requirements, and NGOs also have a say in this, and the most known one, I guess, is ChemSec's SIN list. And what is common for these requirements is it's a generally hazard-based system. So rather than looking at the risk when in use, you look at only the different types of hazards. And if there are CMR, of course, allergy or endocrine disruptors, they could be put onto these lists. And if they are put on these lists, it often means that in some way, your customer think that they are blacklisted and they will be difficult to sell. That's really the reality. For a few examples here, I have a European Printing Ink Association, for instance, who says that raw materials that are CMR, for instance, should not be permitted for use. That's what they tell their member companies, printing companies. In Sweden, we have a BASTA system that is quite extensive. You look at all types of substances that can go into building the new houses and construction materials. And the goal is to only use substances to assure that UN Global's goal of sustainable consumption and production is met. From a company perspective, I only listed one company here, and that was Volvo, but they have used a list of gray, it used to be black list as well, of chemicals which should not be present in processes or chemical products within the Volvo group. They've done this for 25 years or more by now, and they update the list based on new hazards or new data on substances which they don't want to introduce into cars or even into the manufacturing processes. So these are all voluntary systems, and of course there are many more. So it's a continuous discussion with your customer about how and why these substances are or are not on the list, or if the hazard behind this is true or not, and so forth. But then I will introduce a bit about coming changes to the chemical regulations. Because in 2020, the Green Deal was launched. This is a huge deal breaker, I would say, in the EU, which includes many sub-headers. And one of the sub-headers is Chemical Strategy for Sustainability towards a toxic-free environment. This in itself had a lot of sub-goals. And one of them was the revamp of REACH in some way. We haven't really seen that. We are still expecting it to be launched. What we have seen is the revised CLP. It was adopted last week by the European Parliament. And the next step will be for the Parliament to negotiate with the member states to make it a law. And for these new chemical regulations, there's often a reason why laws come into force. The regulators want to introduce a new way of regulating a substance or a product, or removing a special hazard component. And not always is it very easy for the regulator to actually come to conclusion on how to write the legislation. And this is where scientific advocacy comes into play. Because if you ask ChatGPT, at least, scientific advocacy refers to the act of advocating for or promoting scientific research, using scientific knowledge to inform decision-making. And it is to ensure that evidence-based decision-making is prioritized in various domains, from public health to environmental conservation. So it's really to bring science to the table, to say, if you write the legislation in this way, you will include these types of substances or these groups, or vice versa. You will miss these products. And I will give you now 3 examples of scientific advocacy that are previously been addressed. And the first example is for substances that are difficult to test. Because as I showed you already, there is a framework legislation available for what type of toxicity data do you actually need to provide. And it tells you need to do in vitro data, for instance. That's the law. And the regulators need to read the law. There's nothing else you can do. But what happens to substances that cannot be tested according to the regulations and guidelines? Perhaps there's something that doesn't really work. I'm thinking, for instance, of insoluble substances in vitro studies. If the substance only floats on top of the Petri dish, it never gets in contact with the bacteria in the Ames test, for instance, or it flows on top of the aquarium when you're trying to understand the aquatic toxicity for fish. How can you modify these tests in order to better understand the toxicity? If you have a very complex mixture of hydrocarbons with numerous types of hydrocarbons, how can you do a TK study when you can have hundreds or thousands of different metabolites in your body? And nanomaterials are also different when it comes to testing, of course, and metals come in different chemical forms, and the bioavailability will be different depending on the form. So here, the testing will require a combination of probably advanced toxicological methods, and these will be developed with specific guidelines. And this needs to be done in collaboration and cooperation with agencies and with industry and with researchers. So this is one place where scientific advocacy might be needed to actually allow for testing of some types of substances. This is, of course, even more important now that there are ongoing discussions to reduce animal testing, and this is in pharma, this is in chemicals, this is in cosmetics, and this is the introduction of NAMs. Again, can all substances be tested in vitro? Can you use different types of alternative methods using read across based on similar biological adverse effects, or even use artificial intelligence or machine learning? So again, how can you develop methods that are appropriate for many types of chemicals? The second example of scientific advocacy where industry has been involved is where CLP is now changing. As I said, the European Parliament has adopted CLP. And what is new then? Yeah, the new is that endocrine disruption and VPVB substances, a mixture, should now be classified according to new criteria that are set. There are some transition times, but in the end of the day, these hazard classes are not part of a globally harmonized system. So we will now have a set of regulation that is unique for EU, that substances in the EU will be classified and labeled in one way, whereas the rest of the world will have not introduced these hazard classes yet. So this will cause less harmonization between the different parts of the world in classification and labeling. But there are also, to be honest, there are discussions ongoing in at OECD level to look at incorporating these changes into DHS as well. And the last example I have for you is PAHs in single-use baby diapers. This was the example I told you briefly about before, about a possible restriction for a substance or a group of substances, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. These are not registered in the EU, they are not produced. It's a substance or a group of substances that are around in the environment. And in 2020, ANSES in France proposed to ECHA to restrict PAHs in different concentrations in diapers. And yes, we know that polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are known, some of them are known to be CMR. Babies are, of course, a very sensitive population. Still, a year later, ECHA's Risk Assessment Committee, RAC, said that no, there is no risk here, and we don't need any restrictions. And then you can think, why is this? Well, during this year, all the affected industries, meaning diapers, adhesives, because you have the glue that sticks the diapers together, you have the pulp that's the basis for the diaper, polymers and so forth, perhaps fragrances and so forth. All these different industries generated a lot of data to try to improve the risk assessment. They looked for daily urine volumes in babies, pH concentrations of all the different raw materials. This was a huge exercise, of course, to collect all pH concentrations. And on top, develop more sensitive analytical methods, because we are talking at very low levels. ANSES wanted to restrict pHs. And there was also data to compare with background pH concentrations. And altogether, this helped the ECHA to take a more informed decision to say that there is no risk. And this is how industry can actually help making risk assessment much more, make them better. And since then, I just included one reference here, but there's been a lot of peer-reviewed publication on this matter. But here's a research group that looked into the total pH and saw that the dose from breast milk of non-smoking women was approximately between 171 and 30 times greater than from the combined diaper core and top sheet respectively. So well, in the end of the day, the levels that was proposed was very, very low, and the likelihood you will get pHs from different types of exposure was much higher. So that was one of the reasons why this was not put into force. So my summary slide, as you've seen, applied industrial toxicology has many aspects, and you use it across many different sectors. It's very important throughout the product development to assure a safe product in the end of the day. We touched a bit about substitution, especially non-regrettable substitution that you want to assure. You have a vast network of different specialists that you need to talk to and understand their languages. You have a flood of regulations and voluntary systems to relate to, and also understand when changes are coming, how these will impact your products. And possibly, is there scientific advocacy needed to scientifically address and improve the applicability of new laws? So with that, I would like to say thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Anna, for this excellent presentation. Very complete, because you present all your environment around industry, then regulation with REACH, then the substitution principle, the product stewardship, the voluntary system, the changing of strategy, the changing to chemical regulation that will really greatly impact, and of course scientific advocacy that could be a solution. So I didn't see yet some question in the chat, to my knowledge. So do someone have a question right now? And if you do so, maybe you can stop sharing your screen so we can see everybody. I don't know. Yes, but thank you. Thank you, Anna. So is anyone has some question for Anna? So I've got a question. With the Green Deal, it's a big issue, right? It's new.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you look at the Green Deal like this, I mean, it seems that it will need to augment some toxicological testing, and especially in Europe, it's very difficult now to use animals for toxicology testing, and it will also need some new epidemiological studies to see what's going on with chemicals that are already on the market, because the idea is to reduce the toxic environment. So what is your impression about that? What has been said around this?
No, absolutely. You're totally correct in that. And now you're looking into, for endocrine disruptors, for instance, that are coming more. Those will be tested in vitro generally, but you also need to prove in a intact species that you have endocrine disruption. So you need both. You can't just rely on in vitro data. So yes, there are probably more animal tests required going forward. But we also see as I said, the development of artificial intelligence and machine learning is moving quickly as well, and using metabolomics and different types of approaches, I would say, rather than fully replacing animal testing. You can try to find better ways or smarter ways to test.
Yeah, but one issue behind this would be regulatory acceptance.
That is always the question, is when is it going to be regulatory accepted, and who is going to provide all this information as well? Because sometimes it's said that the industry should bring this to the table, do round-robin testing and so forth. But I also heard BFR saying, for instance, no, it might be something that is needed from the regulators, that we need to initiate much more research in this area to assure that we have validated methods in the end of the day, because the validation today takes quite some time. Yeah.
So I have two questions in the chat. So I have one from Stefan Piernet. So to be sure, thank you very much for this very clear presentation. If you want to ask directly your question, Stefan, you can if you want. Or I can read it. So to be sure, regarding
thank you.
Okay, go on, Stefan, please.
Hello. Yes, thank you for this presentation and organization, Mark. Thank you, Anna. Just to be sure to understand very well the presentation, with a practical case, let's say we have a substance which is, of course, rich and goes from 1 to 10 ton to 10 to 100 tons. The question, of course, the regulation has to add, as you presented, some clinical testings or EUROTOX testings, which are very expensive for the industries. So the NAM approaches or in silico approaches can replace if of course we have data, can they replace the testing by themselves? That's my question.
Yeah, I don't think there is a simple answer to this. And of course, everyone would like to have NAMs to be able to replace all the testing across the board. So far, we have local effects are much easier to test, of course, in NAMs or in vitro systems. So skin irritation, eye irritation, skin sensitization, and a few others. But when it comes to systemic toxicity, it's still difficult to understand how organs will interact with each other. I mean, there are sophisticated NAMs available, of course, with organoids and organ on a chip models and so forth that can possibly work depending on what substance you have as well to test. But to date, there is no NAM that is approved to be used instead of CMR testing.
My question is on a double level. We have one level of regulatory. Is it accepted for the authorities, competent authorities? When we think about the regulation, and then of course the second step, then we can discuss of the and legacy of those kind of data. But that's a second step. So in terms of and you answered already a little bit, you said there are no NAMs approved, but is it in terms of toxicologically we know the limits of those approaches, or is it under a regulation restriction?
Yeah, no, to my knowledge, there are no methods available that can truly look at these endpoints. There are that can look at pieces of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle. And on top, the regulators are stuck with the regulations, so they can't ask for anything but what is in the regulation, which is currently animal data. So that's why you will, when you do a testing proposal, you will have to. You can probably argue for a good battery of tests, for instance, but since the legislation is square in that way, yet we haven't seen any openings for looking into that from that angle. But I think everyone is on that. Everyone has the same intention. They want to move in that direction. ECHA had a workshop in May on this topic, and there is a true willingness across the board, which I think is going to be helpful, but we're not there yet, at least.
Maybe we can push on this way. When you spoke about advocacy, maybe that's something we can join, or I don't know, or participate. If there's a, I don't know what. I would be volunteer if you like.
That's excellent. Yeah, no, there are many initiatives in this area from the industry, but for other stakeholders as well. PETA is involved, as an NGO and the regulators. So there is a lot of initiatives available, but we haven't come to the goal yet.
Then there is a thank you, Stefan. Then there is a comment from Sofiane Medbi that do not forget to mention those toxicologists working with medical devices with biocompatibility testing beyond the classical pharmaceutical industry, other regulation, but same constraint, safety, packaging of the, and people working in the manufacturing also.
Absolutely, you're fully correct. And they are extractable and leachables, and there are many other places where you also need to have a lot of toxicological knowledge, of course. But this is not, unfortunately, not my specialty, so I couldn't really address them here, but she surely right, absolutely.
There is also a question from Anna Castro that thank you for the presentation, a very clear and complete overview. And she asks, what do you think about the impact of the new CLP class, endocrine disruptors, in the testing? And toxicologists, sorry because I don't see it. It's coming. And toxicologist and toxicological assessment. I've got it. So what do you think about the impact of the new CLP class, endocrine disruptor, in the testing and toxicologist assessment? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I hear. I'm trying to reflect on the question. It's a big question, and I don't think industry has a clear view on this yet. How this is going to impact the testing. Of course, as I said before, it will be more. But to some extent, for substances with high volume production already, they've been tested or are going to be tested for extended 1 generation reproductive toxicity, for instance, or prenatal development toxicity testing. And here you pick up many of these endpoints by doing these tests already. So, but no, this will be a new field of expertise growing here, I think, for toxicologists. So if absolutely, for low volume chemicals where you need to put forward these type of endpoints, you will need a new set of expertise.
Okay, I don't know, Anna, if you don't want to complete or if you're satisfied, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay for me. Thank you. It was just because I'm involved in some high volume registration process. And I agree with Anna that you can pick up this data from the reprotox toxicity test. But what about the low volume registrations, since CLP is applicable to all substances? So that's why my question is, okay, a new field is growing up, new criteria. So just in the coming years, how you will see this field. So yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you.
I've got a question of Mala Egelba Nineja. I'm sorry, Mala, for the pronunciation of your name. Thank you so much. It was so informative. I have a question, and sorry if you answered it. I might miss. Wondering if a personal care need to be tested for the toxicity, as the table showed only need in vitro for eye skin toxicity test. Wondering they don't need any environmental toxicity. They will reach the environment, right? Because as I understand, the chemical reach the environment. So do you need...
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I see what the question comes from. And no, of course, you will need some other tests as well. I only focus on the human health here in general. And that's why I didn't address other types of testing that's required, but you might need to do physical chemical testing of your product, and you need to also do tests for the environment. So I didn't include them in this presentation. That's for ecotoxicologists too.
It's okay for you, Mara? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I have one more question, and it's about the story of the pH in the baby diapers. Okay, so as you said on your, and you show on your slide, that mostly the risk assessment was based on the fact that there were more pH in breast milk, and then you can find in the diapers. Okay, but you can be exposed to diaper exposition. So it means that the babies are already exposed to breast milk or other possibilities. So, but did they try to address what could be the exposure of the babies to the diapers with skin penetration, etc., and could it reach the threshold of toxicological concern of 1.5 microgram per day? Do you know if they used this kind of approach? Or?
I haven't read ANSE's full report, to be honest. It was very, very comprehensive. But no, they try to look at that for course as well. But we're talking nanograms exposures. So in the end of the day, the concentration limits that was proposed, it was actually lower than concentrations in the environment. And so that was the main concern in a way for the producers, because if they had to produce a diaper that has lower concentrations in the diaper than the environment in general, you have to work in a sterile laboratory with special under special measures. So it is difficult when you have so low levels suggested by regulators in general. And also very close to the detection limit. So that's why the analytics was also improved in many ways.
But that's true. That's really an issue, because I remember an issue with the intimate protection for women. Okay, and there were an issue raised concerning pesticide contamination. You see, because of course there's pesticide trace because it is sometimes based on cotton or other material. And it was really an issue, meaning because some people and some group of people show on YouTube, etc., that this kind of pesticide was very dangerous for the health, etc. And so, if you are someone that is not really educated in toxicology or something else, I mean, you can be afraid when you see a presentation on YouTube saying that this pesticide contaminating you every month. See. So I agree with you. It's also when you are dealing with very, very small amount of compound, it's an issue.
Yeah, and you have to remember the analytical methodologies are also improving as we speak. So you are going down in levels every day almost for the limit of quantification. So you can almost detect anything everywhere these days. So it's a matter in the end of what is the actual risk, not only the hazard, of course. So I think the risk assessment is still a very crucial, important part of the puzzle here.
Okay, so I don't have any more questions. I've got some nice comment saying that it was an excellent presentation. Everybody was very happy. I was coming from 2 PhD students that it was very informative for them. That's very good. So it's part of the education also. So if there is any more burning question, so thank you, Anna, very much for your very clear and complete presentation. It was very, very informative for the public. And I also thank Elaine for the organization and this webinar. And I recall again that the webinar arrives monthly, and the next one will be on November 28th, with given by Share Price and toxicity. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna.
And thank you too. And
have a very nice day. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.